Welcome back, everyone. In this video, let's update the fonts throughout our application, and let's talk a little bit about some of the more nitty-gritty details regarding what it is that we're doing and how it is that we're building our application is going to actually convert into our final application. So it's going to get a little bit meta, but it'll be really valuable, at least regarding how you need to think about web applications on the browser itself. So here we're back on Google Fonts, and we need to download another font. We've gone through these steps already before, but I'm going to get a little bit more specific as to what exactly is happening when you include these fonts into your application. So here, let's pick a font that we like. Personally, I'm going to use Open Sans Condensed because I think this one looks really modern, but you can really pick whatever font you want to use, and I'll show you how you can include it. So here, once you select the font you want, honestly, Google likes to change up their UI pretty consistently. So what you see here might not be what you see live right now. But essentially, there will be a way for you to add the font variation of the one you choose. So for me, there's Open Sans Condensed, but there's Light 300, Light 300 Italic, and Bold 700. Ignore these numbers. Essentially, what this means is that this is the regular, this is the Italic version, and this is the Bold version. Personally, I want just the regular version because I'm not really going to use the Italic or the Bold version in the application. But you can include them if you want to use them. Once you have that, you need to click this right button here that shows the different fonts that you've added. Because what's going to happen is that Google is going to generate this link for you that includes all of the different fonts that you want right here. So for example, let's say that I wanted also the Italic and the Bold. When I select these, you'll actually see this update. So here, notice how this has updated. It now includes the 700. Before it included also the 300 with the italicized, right? The ITAL, if you'll notice right here, ITAL. It's just including the variations of this Open Sans Condensed font that we're also going to download because that's really what's happening here. Now, of course, I mentioned I don't want them, so I'm just going to get rid of them. But here I'm really showing you what is happening when you're generating these font links. Next, what we're going to do is just going to copy these links and we're going to go back to our application code and we're going to go into our index.html and we are going to go into our head section and just paste it right here. And what's happening here is that essentially we're telling our application that when you load this application in the browser, I want you to download these things. In this particular case, what we're actually downloading is this font. So let's copy this href and just see what we are supposed to get back. So if we go back to our browser and we just paste this in, we see this. This is actually a font definition. But if you read it, it's CSS. Font family, font style, font weight, all of these are just definitions for specifically these fonts that we're trying to include and to be able to use them in CSS. So this is really how we're able to define these fonts into our application because Google is giving us a CSS file that allows us to actually define what this Open Sans Condensed is. The source of the actual font is coming from this URL, which is what Google hosts to actually give you the font itself. What we're downloading when we include the link inside of our HTML is just the CSS rules that allow us to leverage these fonts. So that's an important thing to note. So that's the thing about this CSS rule that we're adding, or this CSS file. You'll even notice in the href it says CSS2. So that's an important thing. This is coming and giving us these font CSS files so that in turn we can leverage them in our code. How do we do that? Well, let's go into our index.css. Here, because we're writing Sass, let's actually convert this to index.sass, just for consistency. Inside of your index.sass, what I want you to do is I want you to actually remove all these different font families. You can keep them if you want. Really, it's just saying, I want you to try this font first. If that's not available, try this one. If that's not available, try this one. If that's not available, try this one. And it just keeps going until eventually it lands on one of these fonts that is applicable. For us, because I want my entire application to be in the Open Sans, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to remove all those ones I don't want. We can keep the base sans serif one, but I'm going to say open sans condensed. One more thing we need to do is update all references to index.css to index.sass. Whenever you update file types inside of your project, you need to make sure that you correspondingly update all references to those previous file types and switch them for the new one. So here in our index.js file, we know we're importing our previous index.css, so we need to update this so that it imports index.sass. Oftentimes you will see inside of your web application, if you visit it, it'll tell you that it can't find a certain file, especially if that file is renamed, then you know that's why. It's because you've updated the name, but you have not updated all of the references to it. So beware of doing these types of changes and keep an eye open for it. Now that we have all of our code required to see if our font is loaded in, let's go back to our application. And here we can clearly see that our fonts are now up to date with all of our newest Open Sans condensed font. One other thing I want you to notice is if you open up your inspect and you look at these elements here, I want you to open up the head. Inside of the head, you will see these different 3 style tags, and inside of them is that CSS code that we wrote. So this is one thing I want you to understand about how Sass works. Sass, being a style of CSS or an extension of CSS, requires that Sass library that we installed, because what Create React App will do is that Create React App has actually created and leveraged this configuration so that it will take in the Sass that we've written and compile it down into CSS by the time it actually ends up in the browser. Because the browser cannot read Sass, the browser can only read CSS. But inside of here, you notice that all of this CSS code looks like the code we wrote, except it's using all of the typical CSS non-nested selector behavior. So that's the great thing about Create React App, is that instead of us having to set up our application so that it knows how to transform Sass into CSS, Sass will do that for itself due to Create React App's configuration for our Webpack. We'll talk a lot about Webpack later in the course, after we've already built our application and we want to understand how we can do essentially what it is that Create React App has done for us. But right now, I just wanted to highlight something interesting for you to see since we're talking about Sass and we're talking about our styling right now. If we go back to our application, one final thing I want to mention is that with Create React App, it also generated for us a package.log file. Because I'm using Yarn, I also have a yarn.log file. If you are not using Yarn and you are just using NPM, you would see only a package log file and not a Yarn log file. So what are these log files? These log files are essentially generated by our package managers, NPM or Yarn respectively, in order to determine for an application what version of all of these dependencies that we have inside are locked to in this project. The reason why you want this type of consistency is because these different versions might clash if you're using some specific version and then somebody else who is also coding against this library or this project, they might run different versions. So your code might not behave the same way between these two different developers. So the log file is a way for us to make sure that all of the libraries that we use as a team are locked to the same versions or at least compatible versions. And typically you only need one. So because for the remainder of my project, I'm going to use Yarn, I don't need package lock. Package lock is generated for us because Create React App by default uses NPM in order to scaffold and set up this project. But because I'm using Yarn, I'm just going to get rid of the package lock file. This is only important if you're also using Yarn. If you're not and you're using NPM, don't worry about it. But with this, we have pretty much cleaned up the majority of getting our initial project up and running. We have our fonts in, we have our directory set up. So now let's move on with our code base.